Hello, hello, and welcome once again to the David Messiah YouTube channel, where our watchwords are to teach and to build back up the kingdom of Zion. The title of the talk today is The Law of the Lord versus the Law of the Land. The Law of the Lord versus the Law of the Land. And it arises because in the previous upload, I had been guided to make the remark that if it's a choice between constitutional writ and holy writ, that really we ought to go for holy writ. That constitutional writ is not all that which it is cracked up to be in any case. And I did kind of make the link back to the learned elders of Zion who were behind that, what they call the Great French Revolution, in which they advanced ideas of the rights of man, so-called, under slogans such as liberty, equality, and fraternity. But in the book, I forget what's the title of that book now. Anyway, they were the essential authors of it. In that book, yes, it's called Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. And in page 156 of that book, they are quoted as saying, "Remember the French Revolution, to which it was we who gave the name of great. The secrets of its preparations are well known to us, for it was wholly the work of our hands." So that the French Revolution was a concoction of these people. And they have continued that practice of bringing down governments and so forth, even till this day, through the George Soros Foundation and other kinds of mechanisms that they use, color revolutions and so forth, that they use for the bringing down of whole governments. And a lot of that is sort of attested to in the book, The Confessions of an Economic Hitman. So they go about fomenting coups, certainly in Africa, certainly in Latin America. They know how to bring down governments. Sometimes they use the color revolution approach, which is supposedly democratic, but they also use assassins and hitmen, and they also deploy whole armies. That's how they took out Saddam. That's how they took out Gaddafi. They deployed NATO into Africa, which you would think would have, if NATO is a defensive organization, what are they doing in Libya? Anyway, they use NATO to take out Gaddafi. They use NATO to dismember erstwhile Yugoslavia. So when they advance democracy as being some kind of an absolute virtue, some sort of on its face a righteous approach to government and governance, it really is not. Okay, these are things which are concocted. Again, the slogans of the French Revolution and the sort of philosophical treatises that sort of preceded that, the rights of man and so forth. And same with the United States in terms of what they call those papers, what they call the constitutional papers. Anyway, people like James Madison and Thomas Jefferson and so forth. that wrote all those essays about freedom and democracy and republicanism and the best way, the best kind of government and liberty and equality and all of these wonderful phrases and touchstones. At the back of it all are these ideas, certainly, at least in part anyway, propagated by the learned elders of Zion. So it's not all what it's cracked up to be. And this has come to the fore again in the context of the coup, the Niger coup there in Africa. And that was preceded by the coups in Guinea and Mali and Burkina Faso. And in all cases, we have this sort of, knee-jerk kind of reaction. And certainly for the last one in Niger, we have a knee-jerk response by France that they want to hold on. They want to hold on to Africa. I think they see the writing on the wall that their time in Africa is up. What they really should do is bow out gracefully and try to be a better friend, to the African countries, and they have been as neo-colonial occupiers of those countries, but they're not going to do that. They're going to go down hard, and it's not going to end well for them. That's what I have been guided. And the United States, as the erstwhile sort of hegemon, is on its last hegemonic legs. And it's interesting just to make mention that the United States became the last of many hegemons that came up within the fourth kingdom of the Gentiles prophesied by Daniel. And the preceding three were named, Babylon and Medo-Persia and Greece. But the fourth kingdom was never named as such, but within it many powers came and went. And powers came and haven't quite gone, like British Empire, which fell fairly spectacularly already in 1941 or 42, early 42 at any rate, when General Yamashita of the Imperial Japanese Army basically took down that British Fort Singapore and defeated the general there, what was his name, Lord Lord Percival. And I quite admire Yamashita and how he did it, because the Japanese army was giving him 4 divisions to carry out the task, and he said, no, I will take only 3. Because the 4th division would only slow me down. And when you know a little bit about logistics and generalship, you know that indeed it is a quadratic curve in terms of the complexity equation between number of men and the kind of logistical support lines needed to supply them and keep them supplied. So Yamashita was right. The extra 4th division would have increased, not linearly, the complexity of logistical support, but rather more than linearly, and he was quite right to leave it at home. And he had to move swift, he had to move fast, he had to hit hard, and indeed he had to kind of like, do a sort of a Mike Tyson on Singapore, to get them to basically to surrender, which they did, and just in time too, because Yamashita was going to run out of supplies. So, but he was also a good negotiator in that regard. He must have been a good poker player. And but that was the end of the British Empire. Scripture says that in the sort of ages of the Most High, the beginnings and the ends, the beginnings are accompanied by wonders and powerful works, and the endings of these ages are accompanied by effects and signs. So the effect of the collapse, or the end really, of the British Empire was that fortress Singapore had their guns pointing in the wrong direction, because the Japanese didn't come by sea to try to assault them where the British were strongest. They came down through that peninsula, the Malaysian peninsula, through jungle, which the General Percival never would have thought that the Japanese would try to do that. But that is what they did, and the defensive sort of lines there were essentially non-existent. So that was the end of the British Empire. Churchill had sent out an order to Percival saying, defend that place to the last man. And that order was ignored, or they pretended that they never received it, or something of the sort. So that was an effect, a sign showing the end of the British Empire. And shortly thereafter, in 1945, the beginning of the hegemonic age of the United States, that too was accompanied by a wonder and indeed a powerful work, which was the invention, the creation of that atomic weapon, atomic bomb. They've just made a movie about that, Oppenheimer. I haven't been able to see it. But certainly there was a powerful work when they exploded that two of those bombs over Japan, one in Nagasaki, the other one in Hiroshima. So that signified the coming of the United States as a global hegemon. And that was August of 1945, and we're now in August of 2023. So do the math as to how many years that was, 78 years ago. So now their time is up. As of March 25th, 2022, the third day of the new year, 6008, on the Most High's calendar, he let me to know and had me to put into an audio letter to the Catholic Church and also to the State of Israel that the prophecy of Revelation 18:2 and what followed thereafter in that chapter was fulfilled in the spiritual. And so what we are now seeing is the unfolding in the physical of that war, that battle that has already been fought and determined in the spiritual. So that America's time is up. And we've been seeing the effects, we've been seeing the signs, when Biden, is trying to walk up the steps to his own jet plane, he stumbles 3 times. That's a sign that their time is up. When he's riding a bicycle, nobody touches him, but he falls. That's another sign. When he's on a stage making a speech, and then at the end of the speech, forget the quality of the speech, which is non-existent because he's suffering, obviously, from progressive senile dementia. He's not, the sharp mind that he once was there in the Senate. He never was of intellectual brilliance, but at least he had a certain cunning and a certain sharpness of mind. That's gone. All he can do now is bully and bluster, those around him. But in terms of what it takes to actually be a president of any country, that is gone. So that's a sign. That's an effect of the coming to an end of the American age, the American hegemonic sort of time that they have had, that they have enjoyed, and that they have indeed, well, in a sense, wasted, because they have been as they could have been a great force for good in the world, but being used by the sort of super hegemon, which remains the learned elders of Zion, they have been used to nefarious ends and purposes. And so they've got all these military bases all over the world trying to project power, trying to siphon resources from poor countries that are not able to sort of resist the American bullying. And then finally they went a bit too far by trying to bully Russia. And Russia has been not only their match, but indeed Russia has proven on the battlefield that they quite clearly exceed the military might of the United States in terms of the weapons that they could bring to bear. And there's a video upload on that, NATO's Nakedness Exposed, I think was the title of that one. So that too was being prophesied. It's there in Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39. It's there in Revelation 17. It's there in I mentioned Ezekiel already. It's there in Daniel chapter 11. So things are changing. And now here we have Niger. And Africa has also now awakened. And that Niger coup was given to indicate in the previous upload that indeed that is the beginning of the fulfillment of Daniel chapter 7 verse 18, where it says that Jacob will take the kingdom, the saints of the Most High will take the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever. So we are now at the beginning of that. And Jacob, Israel, saints of the Most High is Jacob. And Negro Africa is essentially Jacob. Same as Bantu. That's just another word for Jacob, because Bantu is a word that actually derives from Kemetic, the ancient Egyptian. Ba is the prefix that means the house of, and the suffix "intu" is from the Kemetic inter, from which we get the English word nature. And inter means God, essentially. So Ba inter or Ba intu means the house of those people who are gods, because the Negro, certainly after, the Exodus led by Moses, were known to the Hamites, to the Egyptians, as the people of God. Indeed, all the tribes round about knew and feared us as being the children of God. So that's what Bantu, that's what the word Bantu means. So that is referring also to Negro Jacob. Negro being another word that in the original Paleo-Hebrew is referring literally to the people of the same root as the Nega. And Nega was a praise title meaning the one, that beloved son that is watched over. And that was a praise title applied to King David. And that praise title, Nega, also came to mean king. So he was Nega Deod. Same as in the Buddhist prophecy, it talks about a coming future Buddha that would be called Nega Chuna. And so that word nega is well known in Eastern languages. Even that city that was bombed in Japan had the atomic weapon, exploded over it. Nagasaki is Negasaki. Saki being another way of saying Iezakaka, which is that name Isaac. So Negasaki is referring to King Zaki or King Isaac. Anyway, that's leave that to one side. But in the ancient languages, in the Ethiopic Hebrew, they use that word nega to mean king, and certainly in Sanskrit and other Indian languages, in the Buddhist tradition, they do refer to this nega Juna. That would be the future Buddha that would arise. And by the way, Buddha is just a corruption of Bayuda. Bayuda meaning the house of Judah. So the original Buddha was simply of that house, a Bayuda house. So he was a Negro, okay, which is clear in the artistic representations of the Buddha, okay. So all of these things now are coming into sharp relief and sharp focus. All right, so Niger coup and the reaction to it is to trot out this lie once again, using ECOWAS. This is the French and the Americans trying to use ECOWAS, and that the new president of Nigeria, Tinubu, and they have all kinds of dirt on him, so he has to do their bidding essentially, unless the Nigerians wise up and he is found wanting in terms of the recent election that he supposedly won, but for all kinds of reasons it was clearly a rigged election, and so really and truly, he may well, when the judicial ruling on that comes in, he may well no longer be the president of Nigeria. But we shall see. In a corrupt society like that, you never know what might happen, because what facts, logic, and law might dictate might not be what in the end the judiciary sort of upholds. So we shall see. But the point is, ECOWAS is being used by the erstwhile powers, France and now the United States, who have a military base there, an important military base, using the idea of constitutional order, constitutional writ, as being the sort of moral lever that they want now to apply and to sort of trot out before the world as being the sort of fig leaf of some morality for doing what they ought not to do, which is to launch war into Niger, a country that is not theirs, okay? And so they have no right, not in international law. The United Nations hasn't given any kind of go-ahead for any sort of invasion under United Nations principles, for any kind of military action, into Niger. But there it is, constitutional writ being trotted out or held up as being the basis now for doing what really they ought not to do. So it throws into sharp relief the point of this talk, which is the idea, law of the land versus law of the Lord. Law of the Lord being holy writ. Law of the land being whatever they might concoct, from time to time, because it will vary as to what the law of the land is. It vary in time and vary in circumstance and vary in whatever country you might be dealing with. But recently, after the French Revolution, there has arisen this sort of more or less global consensus of the rightness of democracy, the rightness of these ideas of the rights of man, the rightness of the ideas of what the United Nations call the Declaration of Human Rights, the rightness of, say, the United States Constitution. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that, and it goes on like that. You have the right to life and liberty and the pursuit of profit or happiness or whatever it might be. The idea excuse me. The idea here in my own country of Trinidad, under our constitution, the idea that, here every creed and race finds an equal place. And and excuse me, and so forth. So we have again that law of the land versus the law of the Lord, because these ideas, these principles, democratic principles, are not upheld by Holy Scripture, not at all. There's no, there's no, holy writ that says you should oppress anybody. By no means. There's no holy writ that says you should, put your boot upon your neighbor's neck. No, quite the opposite. Holy writ says, love thy neighbor as thyself. So Holy Writ does sort of provide, call it a kind of a common sense, kind of an injunction as to how to deal with our neighbors. At the same time, it provides laws and strictures, do's and don'ts, as to how now to treat with the Creator. So we have clear guidance in Holy Writ, same as the difference between common law, which is, what the British call case law, sort of every case is unique unto itself kind of idea, and you have judges who are supposed to consider the matter, weigh the matter, whenever there's any kind of dispute, controversy, brought to a judge for adjudication, consider the matter, weigh the matter, and then form a judgment. And using indeed Holy Writ in many instances as a guideline for making judgment as these cases are brought. As distinct, say now, from statute law provisions, which try to anticipate every contingency and provide a sort of a solution for every little contingency that might occur in some kind of a situation, which is, if you like, man's idea of law, which is what makes the law into an ass, because you can't really anticipate every wrinkle, every contingency that might arise in any given situation, even in a situation where you would think it should be fairly clear cut, like holding an election, for example. It should almost be like designing an engine. It should be a very mechanical kind of a construct, or writing a computer program, which has to anticipate every contingency and give an outcome in the program for every contingency that might arise. And if there's an unanticipated contingency, it should yield a very sort of graceful exit and say, look, well, here's a problem and we don't have a solution to it. Okay? Well, case law, rather statute law, tries to provide an answer to every contingency that might arise in some given, problem domain. And that doesn't quite work because every situation has its own little wrinkles. Every situation is unique to itself. And I know that the legal profession have their way of trying to use, precedents and so forth, trying to write up these cases in such a way that, everything that was germane to the decision is factored in, so that it provides guidance in future cases. If future cases agree in all the germane elements to some previous case that has been adjudicated, then consistency is going to require that, okay, to be consistent, you should give the same sort of judgment in future cases that perfectly match past cases. But, that I don't know. It seems to me a kind of a forlorn hope because, it puts a lot on the people that write up these cases. And you've got to go through voluminous, documents to kind of try now to tease out what a case might have turned upon, which may or may not apply in the case that you're looking at right now. So it is a very kind of, but if you go according to case law, each case is unique unto itself. You don't try to necessarily, you try, well, no, I shouldn't say that. You do try to be reasonably consistent, but, trying to sort of like bring into consideration every similar case that might have happened essentially anywhere in some jurisdiction, and then point out the ways in which they're the same and the ways in which they're not quite the same, and why a decision sort of proposed here now to be taken might differ from what earlier might have been done in an earlier case. Well, it gets a little bit onerous. So leave it to the judges and their good sense to work out what the requirements of justice require in any given case. I will remember a book I studied in my secondary school days. This was a very nice book actually about the South Pacific and some British colonial administrator that had to be the magistrate in some district in the Solomon Islands, I think it was. So he was just the sort of, the warden or the whatever title they gave to those people. But he was like the law in the area that he was given to administer. So he was also the magistrate. And a piece of advice given to him was, look, don't try to justify whatever decision you make as a magistrate. Because if you try to justify it, you're going to be wrong. And people will be able to pick apart the reasoning that you did. Even if the decision itself that you're making is a perfectly good decision. You understand? So that was the trick to being a magistrate. You can't be proven wrong if you never justify your decisions. But the magistrate's decision was law, and he generally did a good job because all he had to do was deal with the case in front of him. He didn't have to be worried about, precedent, that might have been set by some previous magistrate, dealing with a case that was very similar but maybe not quite the same, you see. Anyway, so law of the Lord is like case law. And law of the land is like statute law. You understand? And I am to make the point, he wants me to go to the book he guided me in writing, Coming of David Messiah, chapter 6, in which he had guided me to the book of Susanna, verse 37, which came up as an answer to the question that I posed with Urim as to the role of Trinidad in prophecy. Okay, and so he wants me to now deal. I'm not going to deal with the role of Trinidad in prophecy here now, but I'm going to deal with the parable and the sense of the book of Susanna, and in particular as it turns there at verse 37. And here is what Susanna, one of the books of Apocrypha, says, and this is a quote here from verses 36 to 30. It is a short story, but it is a parable for some what we are seeing today in terms of that Holy Writ versus Constitutional Writ question, and also Law of the Lord versus Law of the Land question, which is the same. Susanna, starting with verse 36. And the elders, the wicked judges, lying, and what's there in parentheses are my words, said, As we walked in the garden alone, this woman came in with two maids and shut the garden doors and sent the maids away. Verse 37. Then a young man who was there hid came unto her and lay with her. That was a lie. We know from the way the story is told. Verse 38. Then we that stood in a corner of the garden, seeing this wickedness, ran unto them. All right, so let me go to the text now, and pardon me for just reading. This verse is indeed the nub of the story, but quite incomprehensible without reading the entirety of the story. Key to the parable is that the story of which the verse is a part, we're getting now to a parable, which hopefully illuminates this question of the law of the Lord versus the law of the land. Okay, so bear with me. Is a lie told by the wicked judges who, driven by lust for the beautiful Susanna, sought to extort her sexual favor by threatening her with this very lie. She refused, although it would mean a case of her word against that of two respected judges. They duly brought the charge against her as they had threatened, and here now at verse 37, as witnesses in the proceeding, tell this lie, expecting it to carry the day in court. Taken as a whole, the matter is simple in its significance and relevance in the present context. Susanna was faced with a choice: A, obey the law of the Lord and face condemnation by the law of the land, the wicked judges, or B, give in to the wicked demands of the judges in the story and face condemnation under the law of the Lord. She chose to obey the law of the Lord and is vindicated in the end. How is itself interesting, as the prophet Daniel steps in the role of what might today be called defense counsel, cross-examines separately the two judges and catches them out in the lie they concocted. The wicked judges were therefore instead the ones condemned, and Susanna is vindicated in her faith in holding fast to the law of the Lord. The key to the parable is simple. Susanna represents Negro Judah. Her honorable husband represents the Most High. The wicked judges represent all the enemy nations round about Israel, as well as those of our own people who have forsaken the law of the Most High to follow wicked ways. The wicked judges in this story were nominally of Judah, though one, it is pointedly mentioned, was actually Canaanite of seed line. And the young man, the mythical paramour, who didn't exist, of Susanna in the lie told by the judges, represents the equally mythical ideological lies, religious and secular, told by those who would have Negro Judah to break our marital obligation to the Most High as His chosen. The pattern is now well worn. We saw it when the heathen Greeks invaded the land and made it a point to introduce and impose Greek ways upon the people of Judah, indeed on pain of death for keeping such laws as Shabbat observance and circumcision. See 1 Maccabees chapter 1, verses 41 to 50, and elsewhere. Under such pressure, many of the people folded and complied. Others went further, not only adopting Greek ways, but urging their brethren to do the same, becoming collaborators with the Greeks, or Hellenized so-called Judahites. 1 Maccabees chapter 1, verse 11, and also elsewhere. It is the same today. Under the pressure of colonization, most of Negro Judah have folded. Not only have we adopted Western ways, we advocate them as being necessary to, quote unquote, make it in the society. Indeed, when the Negro took over the reins of government at independence, the constitutional provisions adopted saw to it that the laws of ECOWAS would be subordinate to secular ideas, such as those put forth in the United States, quote unquote, Declaration of Independence, the French Rights of Man, the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, and etc. In the case of Trinidad and Tobago, the Constitution acknowledges, quote unquote, the supremacy of God, but then provides for the principle sung in the national anthem that, quote, here every creed and race finds an equal place, unquote. If the constitutional God referred to is that of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Most High Power, or Yahweh, then there's a clear contradiction. For the Most High most certainly does not allow that all creeds are equal, since the first and second commandments prohibit any creed that involves idol worship. See Exodus 20, verses 2 to 5. Neither do all races under his arrangements get to share equally in the right to the dominion. For example, in Psalms 108, verses 8 to 9, it says, Gilead is mine, Manasseh is mine, Ephraim also is the strength of mine head, Judah is my lawgiver. Verse 9, Moab is my washpot. Over Edom will I cast out my shoe. So he certainly has different sort of ideas or outcomes or arrangements for Judah and Edom. Here, as elsewhere in Scripture, it is plainly stated that under the Most High's arrangements, it is Judah that is to have the dominion, to be the lawgiver, or to rule. Although Esau/Edom has had the dominion over the last 2,500 odd years, indeed a punishment upon Israel and Judah for their disobedience, his rule is now coming to an end, with a remnant of Judah under David Messiah to rise to rule. So we have a contradiction. The contradiction poses at the least a constitutional problem of framing, for the term God, quote unquote, is undefined. If we seek to define it constitutionally, a worse problem is thrown up, a theological one confounded with considerations of race, religion, and politics, quite intractable in a society fractured along lines of race, color, class, caste, creed, and etc. We must note before proceeding much further that if the God of the Constitution is not that of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, there need be no necessary constitutional problem. Lucifer is granted the title, same God, quote unquote, with capital G, by his adherents, and happily propounds a fake doctrine of racial and religious equality, fake because Lucifer, like the Most High, also has his chosen, to whom he gives the dominion. But the theological and constitutional problem as such would remain if one sought to define clearly what God it is to which the Constitution refers. And in parentheses, a similar problem applies to the U.S. Constitution, wherein there is solemn declaration containing the phrase, quote, one nation under God, quote unquote, unquote, and wherein some constitutional oaths contain required language, so help me God. So which God are we referring to becomes the question. Constitutionally, even in the United States Constitution. The simple theological fact, if we dismiss all the Luciferian nonsense, is that if we acknowledge the Most High, Yahweh, as God, then we must submit to His laws. Under those arrangements, there may be no equality of creed and race. Rather, there is rule of order, as put forward in Holy Scripture, as the right of the dominion. For example, as between man and beast, man is given the dominion. As between man and woman, man is given the dominion. The man is head over the woman in the household. As among the 12 tribes of Israel, Judah is given the dominion. As among all the nations and tribes of the world, Israel as a whole, and therefore Judah in particular, is given the dominion. Nevertheless, while Israel was under the curses for disobedience, every other nation could rise high above Israel. And Israel has come down very low. This is the Negro. That's there in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 43, 28, verse 48, and elsewhere. But even then, the rule of order established that Esau would have the dominion. So when it was not Jacob exercising the dominion, it would be Esau. And that grant of the dominion was given there in Genesis chapter 27, verse 40, where it says, and by thy sword shalt thou, Esau, live, and shalt serve thy brother Jacob. And it shall come to pass when thou, Esau, shalt have the dominion, that thou shalt break his yoke from off thy neck. That dominion indeed Esau has exercised these last 2,600 plus years, and with the sword as prophesied, and with guile and cunning, and indeed having made a pact with Satan. Moreover, he served not the Most High in so doing, despite being of Abraham's seed, but Lucifer in fact. See Daniel chapter 11, verse 38, John chapter 8, verses 33 to 44, and see relevant remarks in the sealed book of Moses. Thus, while propounding the equality of creed and race, he was propounding an essential lie. For Esau, Edom exercised the dominion in fact. This is what the learned elders of Zion at that pinnacle of Edomite dominion, that's who they were. And that is the H-O-R, House of Rothschild. That indeed is the essential fraud of Luciferian doctrine. For even as Lucifer, in rebellion against the law of the Most High, asserts freedom and liberty and rights as somehow superior to the Most High's rules of order, inspires constitutional equality, his adherents are actually the ones who exercise the dominion, however well disguised is that exercise. So it is an essential fraud. Mercifully, Esau's rule, inspired and sustained by the God, quote-unquote, Lucifer, is at an end. Judah is now poised to assume the dominion here in Trinidad and indeed around the world. Trinidad is mere microcosm. And that point is made earlier in this chapter. I won't go into that here. The Most High has his arrangements, and in the end his will be done. The moral of the story of Susanna precisely is that he requires his people, Negro Judah in particular in the present context, to hold fast to the law of Yahweh, the law of the Lord. Whatever the law of the land may require or provide. In particular, we must refrain from embracing an essentially Luciferian constitution, however apparently noble and apparently fair-seeming it may be. The parable of Susanna is especially acute in its applicability because it forces us to acknowledge that our very own leaders have been misled. They are the quote-unquote wicked judges of the parable. But few would think to cast them in that light. Dr. Eric Williams is hailed today as the father of the nation, and deservedly so. He's far and away the greatest man the country has produced. He simply has no peer, neither from before his time, during, nor since. Most important, he had a largeness of heart and spirit. In seeking for independent Trinidad and Tobago, a place where historical wrongs would be righted, but without bitterness and rancor and without racial reprisals. He indeed sought an independent post-colonial society where each person's place would be determined not by race or color, but by merit. It was an admirable dream. Nelson Mandela bequeathed to South Africa a similar dream in seeking a non-racial democracy, and again without racial reprisals. The wrongs of apartheid were to be ended and the deep wounds healed by the provisions of truth and reconciliation. The same noble spirit of forgiveness animated Dr. Martin Luther King in his I Have a Dream message. Not to mention Rodney King, that Negro beaten near to death by the Los Angeles police, whose only lament was, can't we all just get along? The sentiment is noble. Certainly such a sentiment animated Dr. Williams in his thinking. It was to his credit, as also to Mandela's and Dr. King's, and indeed to all the Negro people who shared the sentiment and gave him their support. We are admonished, after all, to forgive, that we too may be forgiven. Nevertheless, Dr. Williams, like the wicked judges of the Susanna parable, was wrong. And like they, he was wrong precisely to the extent that what he proposed was inconsistent with the law of the Lord, Yahweh. He took for granted that which we all unquestionably accepted as we embraced independence with quote-unquote boundless faith in our destiny. As a line in our anthem declares, for all practical purposes, Dr. Eric Williams and the People's National Movement Party, the PNM, had no choice. Nelson Mandela, in giving South Africa a non-racial democracy, likewise had little practical choice. But in making constitutional arrangements that challenge the law of the Lord, Yahweh, and indeed require it be overturned, the result was a foregone conclusion. The Negro, the people that were most in need of what independence promised to deliver, were guaranteed to remain at the bottom, and the ones to receive least of that promise. For the Negro are Israelites under the curses, and subject in particular to Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 43, which says, "The stranger that is within thee shall get up above thee very high, and thou shalt come down very low." Had we been obedient to the law of the Lord, Yahweh, we would have been set as a people high above all other nations, which is the contrasting provision there of Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 1, where it says, "And it shall come to pass, if thou shalt hearken diligently unto the voice of Yahweh thy power, to observe and to do all his commandments, which I command thee this day, that Yahweh thy power will set thee on high above all nations of the earth." So that's a choice. Obeying his law, the law of the Lord, and we would be set high above all nations. Disobey, and we would come down very low. Even the stranger in our midst would rise high above us. Continuing with the text, "Our forefathers, having failed in the requirement of obedience, we, their descendants, have been cursed among others, to see even the stranger in our midst rise up high above us." The simple fact is that for the Negro, equality is not an option available to us. The choice given to us was to stay faithful to the law of the Lord and exercise dominion over all, or else to have every other nation of people rule over us. In failing to rise to this understanding, Dr. Williams and all our other Negro leaders here in Trinidad and indeed around the world have to be likened to the wicked judges of the Susanna parable. And I have to include the Pan-African ideologues in that condemnation. In their ideological lust for the equality of Negro Judah, Susanna in the parable, they have proposed to her that which she cannot give and remain true to the law of the Lord. Therefore, under the parable, they are cast in the role of the wicked judges. It seems a harsh understanding of the matter, but it is nevertheless an acute one and on point. The Most High does not mince words nor pull punches. By extension, also to be equated with the wicked judges are the nations round about that are mingled with the Negro and serving themselves of him. For it is to satisfy their desire that the law and constitution have been framed the way they have, though perhaps not consciously so. Dr. Williams was tutored and raised, as we all were, in the image of the colonial master. Brilliant and defiant though he was, he embraced core British values in their liberalist and humanist expressions. And this was the idea of Fabian socialism, kind of a cousin to Marxian thought and thinking, while railing against the equally British values inherent in the colonial and imperial project and slavery. The humanist ideology underlay the decolonization and independence movements, and in some sense represented the defeat of the imperial project. What was there not to like about equality, after all? And if good for one, good for all. As a people, we had been down for so long that equality was such a huge step forward, we couldn't see beyond that as a goal we should seek. Scripture, however, is clear that there is no equality for the Negro. Again, recall Psalms 108, Judah is my lawgiver. Over Edom will I cast out my shoe. So this does not sound like equality. Far from it. Judah the Negro is to rule under the Most High's arrangements. The nations round about have resented these arrangements from the beginning and envied Judah its position. All the quote-unquote democracy, e pluribus unum, liberty, equality, fraternity, every creed and race slogans are part of a satanic/Luciferian agenda carefully calculated to undo the Most High's arrangement. Because what is it? If we obey the law of the Lord, we would be set high above all the other nations. But conversely, if we disobey the law of the Lord, all nations round about would rise up high above us. Okay, so we don't have the luxury of equality. In that way, the nations round about also fit the Susanna parable in the part of the wicked judges, but with our own leaders in front, as perhaps unwitting cat's paw, which is what we see here now with ECOWAS in relation to Niger being pushed forward by the United States and France. Carrying on, in terms of the parable, Susanna is, of course, the Negro remnant awaiting redemption, forced to choose between the law of the Lord and the law of the land. The righteous remnant will, of course, like Susanna, choose the law of the Lord, even unto death. The mythical young man of the parable, in the lie told by the wicked judges, is the humanist ideology of democracy in its various guises. The key there is to recognize that democracy as such is mythical, just like Susanna's mythical paramour, which did not exist. A lie, like the slogans that underpin it, all men are created equal, that's a lie. Liberty, equality, and fraternity, that's a lie. Here every creed and race finds an equal place, that's a lie. All are we is one, etc. Even in the word itself, democracy, there is contradiction, for in effect it means ruled by the ruled. Note in the parable that the wicked judges are not delusional. They tell a lie. So they know that there was no young man come to lie with Susanna. So, likewise, democracy and those who propound it most know it not to exist. But they use the ideology of it, hoping thereby to have their way with the beautiful Susanna, Negro Judah of the parable. The moral of the parable, even if there were a young man, Susanna ought to reject him in favor of the law of the Lord. And in any case, she must reject the extortionate demand of the wicked judges, which to her credit she does, trusting rather in the mercy and salvation of the Lord, which indeed does not fail to be forthcoming, although the prospects seemed bleak at the beginning. So we may take heart. As we saw with Susanna, the Most High is well able to save his people. Indeed, the Most High made a promise in this regard. Regrettably, the promise that he made to Abram, Isaac, and Jacob will be fulfilled only in a remnant. 2/3 of our people will remain lost to that wicked. So that's what I wanted to bring to your attention and to sort of cast it in the context of that which is now arisen in terms of the coup in Niger and the use of the erstwhile neo-colonial powers, France and the United States, to try to bring Niger to heel using, our own Negro brethren in ECOWAS in Nigeria to do that. And it's sad. I've also been given, as I mentioned in an earlier upload, that this coup is the beginning, I repeat, the beginning of the fulfillment of Daniel chapter 7, verse 18. In fact, let me bring it up and end with it. Yes. Starting at verse 17, these great beasts which are four kings, and the reference there is to the four kings of the Gentiles, the last of which is now the United States, the erstwhile hegemon, whose power is now ebbing as we speak. And verse 18, but the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. So with that, I will say thank you very much. All praises, all glory, all exaltation be unto the Most High, Yahweh. And to all of you listening, I say Shalom.